Namaskar. Prayers for your and your family members' safety and health. In this video lesson, we will continue further in the chapter number 1, The Portrait of a Lady, Standard 11th, English. This chapter is written by Khushwant Singh, and in this chapter, Khushwant Singh writes about his grandmother. We have read how he describes the grandmother to be very old, having wrinkles on her face, and always praying to God. Khushwant Singh has also compared and contrasts the various phases of his life, the village life, the city life, the college life, and then we have read in the previous session when Khushwant Singh goes abroad for higher studies, his grandmother comes to see him off at the railway station. And then, after a stay of 5 years, he comes back. Once again, the grandmother is there to welcome him at the railway station. Let us read from there on. But that was not so. After 5 years, I came back home and was met by her at the station. But she did not look a day older. She still had no time for words, and while she clasped me in her arms, I could hear her reciting her prayers. Even on the first day of my arrival, her happiest moments were with her sparrows, whom she fed longer and with frivolous rebukes. So, in this paragraph, we see when Khushwant Singh comes back from the foreign country after completing his higher studies, the grandmother has come to receive him at the railway station. And once again, she is quiet. She had no time for words. What does this mean? This means that she is still praying. She is still saying her inaudible prayers. And when they reached home, Khushwant Singh found that still grandmother is very happy in the company of the birds, the sparrows. So in that line we come to know that her happiest moments were with her sparrows, and now she fed longer, means she gave food to the sparrows, and she spent more time with the sparrows, and she would also scold the sparrows. Well, not with the intent to hurt the birds, but just out of love. In the evening, a change came over her. She did not pray. She collected the women of the neighborhood, got an old drum, and started to sing. So here we see a change that came in the grandmother. She had found some drum from the neighborhood, and now she was playing the drum. For several hours she thumped the sagging skins of the dilapidated drum and sang of the homecoming of warriors. We had to persuade her to stop to avoid overstraining. That was the first time since I had known her that she did not pray. So one more change that Khushwant Singh notices in his grandmother is that she had stopped praying. In fact, she was very loud. She started singing songs. She was playing the drum, and she was singing about the homecoming of warriors. Looking at the condition, Khushwant Singh and other family members requested her not to overstrain herself, not to sing so loudly, but she did not listen. So therefore Khushwant Singh writes that we had to persuade her to stop to avoid overstraining. That was for the first time, Khushwant Singh says, since I had known her, that she did not pray. Let us read further. The next morning, she was taken ill. It was a mild fever, and the doctor told us that it would go. But my grandmother thought differently. She told us that her end was near. She said that since only a few hours before the close of the last chapter of her life, she had omitted to pray. She was not going to waste any more time talking to us. So, what was the result of singing so loudly and beating the drum? Yes, the grandmother had taken ill. She had mild fever. So the doctor was called, and doctor said that it will be okay. She will get okay soon. There is nothing to worry. But grandmother thought in a different way. She started believing that her end was near. She was going to die. And she also realized that towards the last part of her life, she had stopped praying. And therefore, now she did not want to waste a single minute in talking to anybody. She wanted to spend each and every moment now, till the end of her life, in praying. So, she did not speak to any of the family members. She did not want to waste time in talking to the family members. We protested, but she ignored our protests. She lay peacefully in her bed, praying and telling her beads. So, this is how she did not want to talk to the family members. Even though the family members protested, she ignored the protests. And she was in her bed, very peaceful, very quiet, and calm, doing prayers, telling her beads. Even before we could suspect, her lips stopped moving, and the rosary fell from her lifeless fingers. A peaceful pallor spread on her face, and we knew that she was dead. So, this way, the grandmother meets death. She continuously prayed at the end of her life. She did not speak to the family members, and even before anybody could notice, she died. She very peacefully lay in her bed. Her lips stopped moving, and the rosary fell off down from the lifeless fingers. And she died very peacefully. It is written that a peaceful pallor spread on her face, and then everyone knew that she was dead. That is how was the end of Khushwant Singh's grandmother's life. We lifted her off the bed and, as is customary, laid her on the ground and covered her with a red shroud. After a few hours of mourning, we left her alone to make arrangements for her funeral. So she was put down on the ground because it was customary. It is customary to put the dead body down on the ground. Her body was covered with a red shroud, and there was a little mourning. After that, few family members went for the funeral arrangements. In the evening, we went to her room with a crude stretcher to take her to be cremated. So, arrangements were made for her funeral and for her cremation. In the evening, the sun was setting and had lit her room and veranda with a blaze of golden light. We stopped halfway in the courtyard, all over the veranda, and in her room, right up to where she lay dead and stiff, wrapped in the red shroud. Thousands of sparrows sat scattered on the floor. There was no chirruping. All the birds were quiet. We felt sorry for the birds, and my mother fetched some bread for them. She broke it, that is a bread, into little crumbs, the way my grandmother used to, and threw it to them, threw the bread crumbs to the birds. But you know what was the response of the sparrows? The sparrows took no notice of the bread. When we carried my grandmother's corpse off, they flew away quietly. So, this last paragraph of the chapter presents a very emotional and sentimental picture uh, of the relationship between the old lady grandmother with the sparrows. How even the sparrows came to attend the last moment or the death of the grandmother. And when the breadcrumbs were given to the birds, they did not eat it. What a great response! What a great behavior that the birds showed! What a sensitive behavior the birds showed! When we carried my grandmother's corpse off, they flew away quietly. Next morning, the sweeper swept the breadcrumbs into the dustbin. The sparrows did not eat the breadcrumbs, and the next morning the breadcrumbs were swept away in the dustbin. So, in this chapter, we see how the author Khushwant Singh has portrayed his grandmother, and the name of the chapter also matches with it, the portrait of a lady. So, the lady is the grandmother here. We see in this chapter what kind of relationship between is there between the author and the grandmother, the village life, the city life, and the life after Kushan Singh comes back from the foreign country, and grandmother's love for dogs and the birds. So these are the highlights of this chapter. Hope you have understood this chapter. Let us talk about the question answers. Let us discuss them, and then you can write down these question answers in your Fair English notebook. Understanding the text. Number 1. The three phases of the author's relationship with his grandmother before he left the country to study abroad. So, in response to this, write down the relationship of Khushwant Singh with his grandmother when they were in the village, when they came to the city, and also the university days. So these three phases you need to write down in the answer. The village life, the city life when Khushwant Singh was in school, and the third phase is when Khushwant Singh goes to the university. Question number 2. Three reasons why the author's grandmother was disturbed when he started going to the city school. So in this part you will write down how the grandmother was unhappy knowing about the science lesson and the music. How she was disturbed knowing that there were music lessons and music was not for the gentle people. Music was for beggars. She was also unhappy knowing the fact that there was no study of scriptures in school. Question 3. Three ways in which the author's grandmother spent her days after he grew up. The response to this question could be divided into three parts. First way in which the grandmother responded was she started remaining quiet and spent praying to God more. She was unhappy because she could not help Kushwan Singh in his homework. Second, she spent her time feeding the sparrows. Since there were no dogs there, she spent her time in feeding the sparrows. And third could be she spent her time spinning. So that could be the response to question number 3. Question number 4. The odd way in which the author's grandmother behaved just before she died. And question number 5. The way in which the sparrows expressed their sorrow when the author's grandmother died. Both these answers could be found in this lecture, in this video lesson. So listen to the lesson again and answer these two questions. Hope you have understood the chapter. I want you to do your homework. Write the responses to the 5 questions that we discussed. That is all for this class. Meet you in the next lesson. Bye till then.